Hey Ottawa, this is your Monday Market Snapshot for Monday, August 5th, 2024. Today is Colonel By Day here in Ottawa, Ontario, civic holiday elsewhere, and lots of other names, different places around the country and province. I hope you're having a great long weekend. My name is Annalie Rice. I'm a realtor here in Ottawa, Ontario, and every week I bring you the details of what's going on in the Ottawa real estate market. So let's see what's happening. Okay, so first off, we'll look citywide at the stats. We have the active listings are down by 78 this week, which isn't unexpected going into a long weekend. A lot of people don't want to list their homes, so you have fewer new listings, which we'll see on a later slide. Mostly it was in the detached market that you can see the drop in the active listings. The sales are fairly strong considering we're heading into a long weekend, but given that there's fewer new listings, there's obviously fewer quick sales, so they're down slightly from what we had last week. Okay, so this is the graphic visuals for inventory. You can see the overall inventory being the black, the active inventory being the green line, which both of those show that we peaked sort of in the June timeframe. And sales there you can see are sitting around that 200 or has been slightly over 200, and the conditional sales were about the same this last week. So the little dash lines there show you the difference between this year and last year, how we have so much more inventory this year and last year and last year. And the next three charts are going to show us what that looks for the last 10 years. And I just want to show you that, like, yes, our inventory is super high right now, which is great. But also, if you look on this chart here, you can see the peak. So last year, our peak was back in the fall. So it was like sort of October, November was the peak inventory. And you can see our inventory this year, our peak is sort of in the June timeframe. Okay, so this is the detached inventory. I've broken it up into the next three slides are detached towns and condos. And you can see that our inventory obviously is higher. It hasn't been this high since 2018 was the last time we had that much detached inventory for the month of July. In fact, really since 2018. But when I pointed out in the last one there was when the peak of inventory, you can see in the years preceding our crazy 2020 pandemic years, which was crazy time, you can see that the peaks typically were in the late spring. So you can see that the red dots representing the July are typically just after the peak. So all the way down to 2019, even well, sort of 2020, but I'd ignore that year. The peak was always like kind of May, June timeframe. So July is typically after the peak, and this year again we're just after the peak. It's only the last few years, the last 4 years or so there, where you see like the peaks being after it later in the summer as inventory builds and stuff. So this year looks a lot more like a normal year pre-pandemic. Okay, so this is the same chart just for townhomes, and you can see that we're sort of sitting at our peak. In fact, for townhomes, it looks like this may be the peak. July is higher than what we had in June. Last fall, we just did almost peak that, but in July, those dots are all again for July. You can see that we haven't had this high of inventory in a July since 2016, which is quite a long time ago. And you can also see how low the inventory has been over the past number of years, almost down to like, less than 50 homes on the market in peak times in spring markets and such. And that's because townhomes are a great starter entry point for families. They're not going to be fitting into a condo or such. So when a family needs to buy a home, townhomes are a really great option. Thus, it makes it very competitive. And that's why the sales are always a little quicker for townhomes. Inventory levels are lower. Months of inventory is lower. Okay, and so this is our last of the three. This is the condo inventory, and you can see that again, it hasn't been this high in July since 2018, so quite a while since we've had this inventory levels. The suppression of the sales due to the higher interest rates has definitely slowed things down and allowed the inventory to come back up. Okay, so this chart shows us the new listings. So we had 354 properties that were listed this week. 110 of those were relisted properties, and 244 were new to the market listings. The ratios were 31% of relisted properties, and so 69% new to the market listings. And the one thing I wanted to point out, just sort of and it could change over time here, is that the red line, the sales, which has been fairly steady. If you see for the last 4 or 5 weeks there, we've been sort of sitting at or above the 200 mark. So it's holding on pretty strong. It's not dropping off quite quickly yet throughout the summer, which is not quite typical. You see that it's a little bit closer to the blue line. So you see that they're sort of overlapping at points, they're close, and that's what's allowing our inventory levels to start dropping off this fall. So you see where the red lines and the blue line are vastly separated, there's a big gap there. That's where the inventory climbs. And then when the red line overlaps or goes above the blue line, that's where your inventory really does start to drop off. Okay, so next up we'll talk about sales. So this week we had 219 sales. 18% of those were sales with no conditions. And that's sort of around the same point that we've been recently. It's been sort of hovering just a little bit below that 20% mark. And 23% of the properties that sold this week were ones that sold at or above asking price, which is just about the same as it was last week. For sales within the first 7 days, it was only 8% of the sales. There was only 18 properties that sold within 7 days. And that makes sense when you have so many fewer new listings to the market, then therefore there's just less awesome new inventory to look at and to sell. 50% of those sold with no conditions, and that was up by 9%, which I guess when you're only looking at a few sales, it's easy for the percentages to climb pretty quickly. And 67% of those sold at or above asking price. Sales within the first 30 days was 46% of the sales this week, which was 101 properties. 19% of those sold with no conditions, and 34% of those sold at or above asking price. So those numbers all kind of make sense for the lower number of sales this week. Okay, so for those that sold at or above asking price, so how did that break down? We had 51 homes that sold at or above asking price this past week. 27 of those, which was 54%, sold at asking or up to 1% over asking, so very close. 36% or 18 homes sold between 1 and 5%. And then we had 6 homes that sold for more than 5% of the asking price. That was 12% of the sales that were at or above asking price. The highest this week was a 16% over asking, and it was also the same one for the dollar amount. It was $150,100 over asking. It was a 1945 built bungalow with a detached garage in the Glebe, which is obviously a very highly sought after area. It was listed for $949,900 and it sold for $1.1 million. Small house, large lot. Lots of the houses in that immediate area have been redeveloped into probably either large homes or potentially a semi-split and then put into semis. So that's probably the future for that little home. Next, we'll look into the different areas of the city, and you can see that my central urban area is everything inside the green belt, does not include Blackburn or Bell's Corners, and then I've got the 3 main suburbs of the city. Okay, so central urban area, we've got a drop in inventory across property types, most notably in the detached market. And for sales, it was a bit of a slower week for sales, and the condo market was quite slow this week. And in Canada, Stittsville, we had a drop for both detached and towns fairly significantly, and a slight increase for the number of condos on the market. Sales were flat for detached and down for townhomes, although that was a huge week last week for townhome sales in Canada, Stittsville. And condos actually had a lot of condos that sold this week, 9 condos, which is a lot for Canada and Stittsville. Okay, in Barrhaven, Riverside South, the inventory was actually up slightly for detached and condos and flat for townhomes, and the sales were up slightly for detached and towns, and condos were down just 1. Although I would note that the detached sales last week were super low, so this is just sort of bringing it back to a bit more normal. Okay, and so for Orleans, finally, we've got a slight drop for detached and slight increase for towns and condos for active inventory. Sales were down by almost half there for Orleans for detached homes, although 27 last week was a huge number. Flat sales for townhomes at 11, and condos were down fairly significantly, down to 3 sales this past week. Okay, so the next 3 are tables of full data, and again, I point this out every couple weeks, is that the active cumulative days on market is continuing to climb. It was a little bit less this week. It was only went up by 1 or 2 most of the different categories. And then the conditional homes sold are below the sold, which again fully supports the idea that next week's sales will be down fairly significantly. This one's for the townhomes. You can see that the days on market numbers are a little bit lower than what the other for detached and condos. And again, the number of conditionally sold is below the sold. So again, we'll expect the sales to be down next week. Okay, and this is for the condos. You can see that the days on market is generally a little bit higher. And as a bit of a flop, here you've got the conditionally sold properties are actually higher. It was a really slow market for the sales this week of condos. So it's possible that our conditional sales being higher this week, we could actually have more condo sales next week than we did this week. We'll see. So unfortunately, I don't have the Ottawa Real Estate Board or my brokerage stats yet for the end of month, seeing as it's only the 5th and we've had this long weekend in there. But I have updated all of these slides for the month-end stuff from mine, so it gives you a good idea of what happened in July as a whole, and they are updated from last week. So this chart here shows us the month-to-month average sale prices. So you can see from June to July 2024, we had fairly flat, again, I mentioned this last week, the detached average sale price actually went up, which was a bit surprising to me given the amount of inventory we have. The semi-detached, freehold, and condo row homes all dropped the semi-detached, freehold, and condo apartments dropped a little bit, and the condo row homes actually had a bit of a rally and went up by 5% average, 5.5%. Okay, so these next 4 charts are show you not only the month to month, that's looking the black lines to black lines, but also the year to year, and you can sort of see the trends. So this is for the detached market. You can see that, this looks like last month was a bit of a dip because the 3-4 months before that had been a little bit higher. So you can see that the trends of average sale prices do go down in the fall, so don't be surprised when the average sale prices do drop over the next few months. It is completely normal. If it is not dropping, then that would be the thing that is abnormal. This is the same chart for the semi-detached, which I pull out for these stats. And I say this every single time, is that semi-detached market is a lot more volatile because there's wide variances of which types of properties are semi-detached. You can have older semi-detached back in the 50s, 60s, and then you've got luxury ones, especially in like the Glebe or Westboro areas. You've got semi-detached that are very expensive. So it really depends on what is selling which month, and so that really affects the averages. So unlike the semi-detached market, the townhome market is very steady, very solid. Most of them are very similar styles and types, and there's a lot of them. So you can see that the average prices don't vary quite so much. In fact, if you look at the July numbers for the last 3 years there, they've been very, very steady throughout. Like if you're buying or selling in July, the average prices have been very steady through the last 3 years. And here we have the condos. This is all of the condos, so apartment style, stacked, and row condos, anything that is a condominium. And you can see that there's a lot more volatility here. It really depends on what is selling. There are luxury condos, there are budget condos, single bachelor condos versus 3 bedrooms and such. So it really depends on what sells to what feeds into the average sale price. Okay, so these 3 charts have been updated from what I had last week, just because we had all the full July data. And you can see this is the close price to the original list price ratio. It shows you how close to the list price or the original list price the sales are happening. And you can see that for all property types there, it's starting to drop off as we move into this summer, slumber, and potentially the fall market as well. So homes are selling a little bit further below those asking prices, which will continue to trend down unless the asking prices start to come down as well. Okay, so this is the average days to sell. So this is for just the properties that are actually selling. You can see that the averages are sitting around that 30-day market point, and you can see that they are climbing, or at least this last month they all did climb a little bit. So this is just a factor of high inventory levels, bit slower sales throughout the summer. It takes longer to sell. Okay, so updating this chart was actually probably the one that was the biggest surprise to me this week, was that how many more sales we had at the last few days of July there, and how you can see that there are quite a few years in the last 10 years there that are below the number of sales we had this week. So it's not, those peak years, 2020, 2021, but it's higher than 22 or 23. That's the purple and the dark blue. But it's also higher than a lot of those ones that were in the early teens years. So expect that when the stats come out for the Ottawa Real Estate Board, they're going to say, how many sales there were in July, and then how that compares to the 5-year average and the 10-year average. So it's going to be below the 5-year average just because we had a couple of really record-breaking years, but it will probably come close to that 10-year average. And it was nice to see it bounce back after being below for the last 2 months. Okay, so these next 3 charts here are the months of inventory broken down into the different property types. You can see that for detached, it's 3.3, condos 3.1, and townhomes 1.9. And if you're unaware, months of inventory is how many months it would take to sell all of the current inventory if no more properties came on the market and sales stayed the same as they were for this past month. So it would take a little over 3 months for detached and condos to sell all the current inventory, and the townhomes would take just under 2 months. Okay, so this is the months of inventory for all property types for across the city, and you can see that we're sort of sitting at about that 3-month point, and it is on the rise, which is totally normal as you head into the summer and fall. That's where the sales slow down, so the months of inventory climbs. By definition, we're still technically in a seller's market, but I think for most buyers and sellers, there's lots of negotiations happening out there. We are definitely more in a balanced market. And again, I say this every week, every month, is that it really depends on what the property is. There are some properties that are still going to be, selling quickly, as we see in my sales data there. And those ones are definitely not in a buyer's market or balanced market. The sellers have the control of that when they have a highly desirable property in a highly desirable area, priced properly. On the opposite side, there's lots of properties that have been on the market for a long time, and they're potentially open to negotiations. There's lots of space for negotiations, and in that case, it would be much more of a buyer's market. So it really depends what you're looking and where you're looking as to what type of market it is. Speak to your realtor about that and find out what's happening for what you're looking in the specific area. Okay, so it's a bit of a longer update, and next week I'll have the Ottawa Real Estate Board stats and my brokerage stats to fill in those little gaps of the month-end stuff. But I hope you have a fantastic long weekend despite the rain we're having, and a wonderful week ahead.